Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Computers Client Build 9, Part 3. In this part of the build log, I'm going to focus mainly on the mods. There's still a lot of work to be done and I'm going to bring them close to completion. I'm going to start this video by taking a look at some components that I've upgraded. Now, earlier in the build, I upgraded the motherboard from the Gigabyte Z77N Wi-Fi to the EVGA Z77 Stinger. I've now also upgraded the CPU from the Intel Core i5 3570K to the 3770K, and I've also upgraded the graphics card from the EVGA GTX 670 to the GTX 770. I also have a new water block here and backplate for the graphics card. So this system has had some substantial upgrades since the beginning. Now, as well as the mods I'm doing to the case, I'm also doing some minor mods to some of the other components. You can see here I've removed all of the stickers from the memory. I've also done this to all of the other components. Obviously, the reason I'm removing the stickers is to clean up the aesthetics. These are Samsung 830 series SSDs, and by default they have an orange square in the bottom left hand corner with the size of the SSD. Now, this is actually not a sticker, it's painted on, so I had to very delicately remove it with a paint scraper and thinners. I've started applying vinyl to some of the components. The vinyl I'm using is 3M brushed aluminium vinyl, and you can see I've applied it to either side of both of the radiators. Now, I don't like using a lot of vinyl in a build. Most of the time, the reason you use vinyl is so that it looks like the real thing. And if you go putting it everywhere, it just doesn't look realistic anymore. So you need to find a way of applying it so that it looks realistic, so that it looks like you haven't even used vinyl. And the best way to do this is to make it look subtle, to only use it in certain places. Pick those places very carefully. For example, I've used it on the side panels of the radiators. So it looks like the side panels are brushed aluminium, then the rest of the radiators have a different finish. I've decided to make some changes to the hard drive and SSD configuration. Originally I was going to use these UN SSD brackets and also this hard drive silencer. And I spent a lot of time coming up with a way of fitting the hard drive silencer into the Bitfinex Prodigy, which with the other components I'm using was a real challenge. So I built a bracket which allowed me to install the hard drive silencer up against one of the side panel windows. Then I was going to use the UN SSD brackets to mount the SSDs onto the bottom of the hard drive silencer so that they were visible through the side panel window, and I was going to make a feature out of the SSDs. And I was happy with what I came up with. I spent a lot of time building the brackets, but when I did the test fit, it looked far too cluttered and it blocked view through the side panel window, obviously, to a lot of the important components, the reservoir, for example. So I've decided to remove the UN SSD brackets and also the hard drive silencer from the build. I'm going to mount the SSDs directly to the case, and I'm going to build a custom enclosure for the hard drive which will allow me to tuck it away somewhere out of sight. So you'll see how all of this is going to work later in the build. I'm now going to install the water block and backplate onto the GTX 770. Before I do, just a quick look at the components. I've always liked the aesthetics of EVGA's components, whether it's their graphics cards, motherboards, or anything else. They have clean, subtle, and elegant aesthetics, and this graphics card is a perfect example. It's expensive and classy looking, black and gold accents. The gold is glossy, although it's lightly brushed. You can see the corners are all curved. There's even a curved lip up to the fan. They've just tended to all of the little details. Looking at the end of the graphics card, you can see the fins are black. And with any other manufacturer, they'd be silver. You'd be able to see the rough casting marks. It would just cheapen the look of the graphics card, but certainly not with EVGA. This is a great looking graphics card. So looking at the connectivity, we have dual DVI, HDMI, and DisplayPort. Okay, to be honest, it's been a long time since I've seen a water block out of EK that I've actually really liked the look of. I loved EK's old design, and when they released the CSQ design, I just wanted them to go back to the old design. And I talked about EK's ThinkCell in a recent video. And EK released ThinkCell a few months back now, and I was really excited about this. It's really the best thing they've ever done because they're talking directly to the community, taking their ideas and you know, putting them in their products. Basically, ideas are coming directly from the community and going straight into manufacturing thanks to EK's ThinkCell. So it's very exciting, and I think it has, you know, the potential to develop and change because they're doing a number of different things with ThinkCell now. And you can see EK now, they're just expanding, branching out, doing all different things. And you know, this water block is an incredible looking block. I absolutely love this block. It's, you know, they've gone back to a lot of the elements of their old design. I mean, we have no frosting, we have no circles. We still have the square design, but I really like it because it means more of a full cover block. The acrylic covers more of the block, and you can see through it to the PCB underneath. Everything about this design I really like. You know, a nice thick solid piece of acrylic over the nickel plated copper. Despite that, it's fairly low profile, and we have this new inlet outlet design which is also low profile. It appears to be restrictive, but you know, it's not. It's very similar to their old design, which was actually part of the water block itself. But I can tell you, I'm really happy with this water block, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what EK comes out with in the future. They're coming out with so many different components now. It's also great to see backplates without the CSQ design. They've really gone back to their old design here. Having anything on a backplate really starts to defeat the purpose of a backplate, because the main purpose of a backplate is to clean up the aesthetics, to cover up the back of the PCB. So we have an EK logo and an NVIDIA GeForce GTX logo in the bottom right hand corner. I've now installed the water block and backplate onto the graphics card, and this is an incredible looking config. I mean, the water block covers all of the PCB, except obviously a lot of it is transparent. So you get the durability, which I think is really important. You know, that's a lot of the reason I would go for a full cover water block, is so that the config is more durable. I mean, it's going to be stronger, stiffer, and also if all of the PCB is covered, you know, there's really no weakness. And I think it's great that a lot of it is transparent so that you can actually see the PCB. Not that any of this is going to be visible in most builds anyway, but still. And I really like the new inlet outlet design. I think a backplate is always a nice addition. It improves strength and again durability and the aesthetics. Okay, I wasn't actually going to mention this, but I thought that some of you may notice. Some of you will know that I'm very fussy when it comes to building systems. Recently I set up a spray booth. I now have a compressor and a spray gun and a proper spray system set up. Before that, for a while I was using spray cans for modding. And at this point in the build, I'd actually completed all of the case mods and painted the case with spray cans. I've decided to go back, get another case, do all of the case mods again, and paint the case again. And I don't have to do this, but this is just the way I do things. And the reason I'm doing this is because with the new system, the finish is higher quality in every way. It's more durable, scratch resistant, longer lasting. It's a far more even finish. It looks better. So this is going to set me back a fair bit, but it's definitely worth it for the end product. I'm now going to work on the side panels. I'm installing side panel windows in both of the side panels. When modifying the Bitfenix Prodigy side panels, and this really goes for any side panels, but it is a little bit more difficult I find with the Bitfenix Prodigy, you need to be careful about how you design the side panels, where you make your cuts, where you mount the acrylic, because the acrylic can come to rest up against parts of the case which will prevent the side panel from actually fitting. And I find that even with 3mm acrylic, it's actually too thick if you want to install it all the way across the side panel, a full side panel window, because it comes to rest up against the motherboard tray. So with 3mm acrylic, you'll find the side panel bulges a little bit, and the motherboard tray ends up scratching the acrylic. So you really should be installing thinner acrylic if you go right across the side panel. As you can see, I'm not going to install a full side panel window. So I've mentioned that I'm doing all of the mods to the case itself again, and that includes the top panel mods, which involves building a new top panel. So I'm making this panel again, and this time I'm actually doing things differently. I'm following the measurements that I used on the front panel. So the front panel and top panel are going to match. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on both of the panels. I'm going to have another acrylic panel covering the fans. You'll see what I mean later in the build. The side panels are now ready to be painted. I've completed all of the cuts, drilled the mounting holes and sanded them back. So you can see the design that I've gone for, and as I've mentioned, one of the reasons I went for this design was because if you use 3mm acrylic or anything thicker, it's going to be a very tight fit if you go for a full side panel window, and actually anything thicker than 3mm acrylic and it's not going to fit at all. And I prefer not to use a thinner acrylic, but I also wanted to go for this design anyway because I wanted to cover the side of the power supply and the motherboard tray. It's going to be a lot cleaner that way. That's where a lot of the wiring is going to be coming from. It is custom wiring, but still I also prefer this design because, you know, it makes things a little bit more interesting. So the top panel is not quite complete. I still need to drill a number of mounting holes. I need to drill a mounting hole in the 4 corners to mount this panel to the case. And I also need to drill 6 mounting holes to mount the panel that's going to sit above the fans. But you can see it has the exact same design as the front panel. I've just copied it exactly. So they're going to match perfectly. The only difference is I've pushed the radiator further towards the back of the panel, which means towards the back of the case. And I've done this so that both of the radiators will fit. I'm now painting both of the side panels, the new top panel, the power supply bracket and the expansion slot bracket. After this, I'll only need to paint the case itself and also some other panels that I'm still going to build. The custom hard drive enclosure, for example. This is the second build I've used my new spray setup for. The first one was the Cosmonaut. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my setup. Obviously this is running off a compressor. The compressor pushes a large air volume. It's really specifically designed for painting, and you need a large air volume for consistency. High pressure is not that important. I'm only using 45 psi here. The gun I've chosen is very small and compact, as you can see, and some of you may think it's too small, but for modding you don't need a gun that holds a large paint volume because you're only painting small surface areas. What you need is something that is compact and maneuverable that you can get inside of cases. And I find that this holds plenty of paint for what I'm doing. Usually I hang about 4 to 5 panels, and I can do 2 coats of all of the panels before I need to refill the gun. So I wouldn't exactly call this a spray booth. What I've done, I've just hung a piece of plastic from a wall. I spray up against that piece of plastic, and I'm in a highly ventilated area, so ventilation is certainly not a problem. For those of you who think that spraying with a gun is going to be more difficult than spray cans, it is absolutely the other way around. Spraying with a gun is an absolute breeze. What I find is, you know, spray cans are completely different every time. Every can you pick up is completely different. So you're trying to get used to them constantly. With a gun, once you get it set up and get used to it, that's it. You know, you can absolutely perfect your technique. And it just goes on so evenly, thinly. I mean, you can make mistakes. You can hold the gun in one position for, you know, 5 seconds and it still doesn't run. It's just very, very easy. Now, the only complicated part is getting things set up, knowing what to buy, knowing how to adjust it, the air paint mixture, the pressure, knowing how to mix the paint, all of that. But that's all very easy to find out. And as I mentioned in the Cosmonaut build log, the best way to find out most of that is just to go to, you know, the paint store where you're picking everything up from and just talk to them about it. I've finished painting the panels and I'm really happy with the way they've turned out. The finish is just perfectly even and it's almost a perfect match to the stock finish on the BitPhoenix Prodigy. The texture is almost exactly the same. Now, this is really my favorite finish in black. I prefer this finish over a matte finish. I don't like matte black, and I also don't like gloss black a whole lot, at least not on cases. I really like this finish because of the texture. It has a very strong texture. You can actually, you know, feel it when you touch the panels. You can easily see it, and you actually see this finish on a lot of cases. It turns out I'm going to be covering all of these panels with vinyl. Initially I wasn't planning on it but I knew I was going to be covering part of the outside of the case with vinyl. I just hadn't decided which panels yet. And I think these panels are going to be the best option. I've already mentioned how I'm going about getting a realistic look with the vinyl. That's part of it. Also, I want to create a balance between the different finishes on the outside of the case. Now, usually you try to match up all of the finishes, but this case is going to be almost entirely black on the outside. The only different color you are going to see is the white from the fans, which you'll be able to see through the acrylic. And so that the case doesn't look bland, I've decided to keep all of the different finishes that we have here. So the brushed finish, the satin finish, also the soft touch finish of the top and bottom sections of the case, and the high gloss finish of the acrylic. So I think all of these different finishes are really going to add to the look of the case. I'm now doing a test fit of the new front panel of the case. Now, I've actually already done this test fit with the previous case. As I've mentioned, I'm doing a lot of the case mods again, so I'm having to do this test fit again. Everything fits perfectly, so I'm now moving on to a test fit of the new top panel. As you can see, I've also installed the fans and radiator onto this panel. And this top panel is very different to the first one that I made. The first one actually didn't go all the way out to the outside and touch the plastic part of the case. And the reason I didn't do that initially was because, as you can see, the case curves off on either side, and I didn't want there to be a visible gap on either side of the case. But it turns out the gap is only very small anyway. Now, this acrylic panel is the one that is going to sit in front of the fans. So there's going to be two of these exactly the same, one on the front panel, one on the top panel. So this one's for the front panel. I'm now going to make one for the top panel. So I've cut it out, I've drilled the mounting holes, and I'm now polishing the edges. It's really important to polish the edges on this panel because I've actually beveled the edges and curved them. And obviously the panel is going to be in view. Even for side panel windows, when you pull the side panels off, you can see the edges of the acrylic. So basically I always polish the edges of acrylic. It doesn't matter where it's going to be. And it's a fairly easy process anyway. After you've cut it, it's obviously going to be very rough. So I usually start with a 120 grit sandpaper, and then I go all the way back to 2000 grit in intervals of 300 to 400, it's not that critical. 300 to 400 grit, that is. And after 2000 grit, it's still fairly dull. You could go further than 2000, but I like to use a polish after that because it's just very quick and easy. The polish I'm using is made by Novus. It comes with 3 products: a heavy scratch remover, fine scratch remover, and a clean and shine, which is basically just an alcohol to remove leftover oils and particles. So what I'm using here is a Dremel with a cloth polishing attachment. I have the RPM turned down as low as it goes, otherwise I find it burns the acrylic. And if you get a burn, you need to go right back to about 400 grit and pretty much start again. And I've just applied the polish. I've spread it out really thin. It's actually better if the polish dries, it works better. And just to give you an idea, it took about 2 minutes to get around the edges of this panel, so you don't need to spend much time with it. I've just finished cutting out some spaces from 6mm aluminium tube. You'll see what these spaces are for shortly. They're still fairly rough. I still need to clean them up, do some filing and sanding, and then I need to prepare them for painting. The reason I'm painting them is because they're going to be almost in full view. I'm now doing a full test fit of the front panel and top panel. So I've installed the fans and radiators. Now, considering that these panels have been made completely by hand, you know, all of the cuts have been done freehand with a jigsaw. I've then gone around with a file and, you know, fixed all of the curves by eye and cleaned up all of the cuts. I'm incredibly happy with the way they've turned out. In particular, the front panel, the 10mm smoked acrylic front panel. You know, all of the polishing has been done by hand. Very, very time-consuming work. The way I've designed this case is so that you can install the fans and radiators before you install the top panel and front panel. It's 8 bolts to install the fans and radiators and only 4 bolts to install each of these panels. Also, what this means is you can install most of the components into the case before you install the front panel and top panel, which gives you far easier access to the inside of the case. And with a case like the Bitfinex Prodigy, which is fairly small and cramped, this is going to be a massive benefit. It's going to make things a lot easier for both assembly and disassembly of the build. I've now installed the acrylic cover panels over the fans, so at last you can see what I was getting at with this design. And now you can also see what the spaces are for. I have 6 spaces for the front panel, 6 spaces for the top panel, and I cut the spaces off at 10 millimeters. So this means that there's a 10 millimeter gap all the way around the outside of these panels for airflow. And some of you may be thinking that this design will restrict airflow. It will slightly, but you have to consider that these fans are very low RPM. They really don't move much air volume. And the other thing is, there's overkill radiator capacity in this build. Really, I could have got away with a single 240 millimeter radiator. So it's not going to make any difference to performance if I restrict the airflow a little bit. And what this design is all about is aesthetics. So, it's not about performance. I've now also installed the side panel windows. There's a couple of ways of installing side panel windows. You can use double-sided tape, which means from the front of the side panel you can't see anything, there's no bolt heads, it's clean. Or you can use bolts like I have. Now, I usually bolt my side panel windows on for a couple of different reasons. Double-sided tape works perfectly if you use the right tape, 3M double-sided tape. It's strong, durable, it lasts forever, but I just don't like the idea of it so much. You can see it from the back of the side panels, it looks a bit messy. And being able to see the bolt heads from the front of the side panel really works for a lot of builds. I also went to a lot of effort to make sure that the insides of the side panels are extremely clean. You can see that I curved the corners of the acrylic, which means there's less material to bolt onto, but it looks a whole lot better. I also polished all of the edges. I'm now doing a test fit of the top panel and front panel together with the fans and radiators installed. I have removed the cover panels from both the top panel and front panel, but now you can really start to get an idea of what the case is going to look like when it's finished. Now, I'm really happy with the way the radiators ended up fitting, because fitting two 240mm radiators into this case meant a fair bit of modding. I mean, that's the only real reason I modified the top panel, was to make enough room for the 2 radiators. And I knew it was still going to be a tight fit. And it turns out that the front radiator has a 5mm gap underneath it, and then the top radiator has a 5mm gap behind it. So it's just worked out perfectly. And also the placement of the inlets and outlets of the radiators was very important, obviously, for my tubing routing. So that was something else I had to think about. Anyway, that sums up this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and favorite if you want to see more.